Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we're going to be making Bubbles, which is one of the quilts from my book, Simple Quilts for the Modern Home. This quilt uses applique, and you can use any type of applique you want to do this quilt, but I'm going to use Fusible Applique because it's fun and fast, and it makes the quilt go super quick from beginning to end. This quilt is a great introduction to applique because you don't have a bunch of really weird shapes to go around. It's just a bunch of circles in different sizes and in different colors, and you're making one panel, so it's not a huge piece to be working with, especially when you're doing the decorative stitching around the edges to sort of secure everything and keep it in place for years to come. And make sure you stay tuned to the end where I talk about how I quilted this to give it added dimension in all of the negative space, because one of the great parts about modern quilting is negative space, and that is a quilter's paradise. You can have a lot of fun creating a lot of fun designs when you have a lot of space to work with, like I did with this one. Let's get started. So when you use Fusible Applique, you need some sort of fusible webbing to go with that. My favorite is Heat and Bond, and I like the light weight for this type of application. It comes in regular packs where you can trace everything out, and it also comes in this Easy Print Light, which you can just feed through your printer so you can get your shape on there. Now for this one, the actual book has it decreased a little bit, so you need to enlarge it by 120%. If you're not sure how to do that on your computer, you can take it to a print shop and they can do it for you and create a PDF that you can print at home. What you want to make sure is that your square mark is 1 inch when you do that. But it gives you the dimensions that these circles are supposed to be, so you can always draw them out at home as well if you prefer to do that. But there's going to be several different sizes of circles that you're going to have with this. I find that the Easy Print Light works best on very uncomplicated printers. So it works really well on just my plain inkjet at home. The one that's a little bit fancier that we have at the shop, it doesn't like to feed through it very well. What it is, both in the Easy Print Light and in the packs that you get, is there is a paper side, and that is removable. And then there is a bumpy side, and that has your fusible glue on it. So when you do this, you want to make sure that whatever applique you're doing is reversed. It doesn't matter in this case because the circles are going to be the same whether they're right side or reversed, but it does matter for some patterns that you might do. The light, the Easy Print Light, is nice because if you have a pattern where they've prepped that for you already, it saves a ton of time because it does take a long time to trace everything out if you're doing that by hand. But if you just put it through the printer, then it goes really fast and really easy, and you can get to sewing a lot faster. All right, so I'm going to show you next how to cut this out so we can do a windowing technique. It makes the quilt more flexible in the end, and it helps prevent seeing any of these little bumps that are on the back of your paper from showing through in the quilted design. As always, all the supplies you need for this project, including signed copies of the book, are available over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. All right, so when you do this, what you want to do is you're going to want to cut it out, and you want to cut so that you've got about 1/4 inch on either side of your template. So you can see here I'm trimming about 1/4 inch outside of that large circle. And this is a real rough cut. It does not need to be perfect. What you're just trying to do is get off any excess fabric so that or fusible web rather, so that way you can use as much of the fabric as possible when you're laying this out. Your fabric is going to look a little bit like Swiss cheese when you're all done, but it's all good. Applique is totally worth it when you have something like that. All right, so you can see I made it all the way around the edges. So now what I'm going to do next is just fold that over, and I'm going to cut in about 1/4 inch in from that printed line, and you can eyeball that. And the reason why I do 1/4 inch is that sometimes on really light fabrics, you can still see this a little bit, the webbing, and so, or especially if you're using cheap fabrics, which I don't recommend that you do. So this way, if you're doing about 1/4 inch, it's going to be enough to get it to stick down, but not so much that your decorative stitch won't cover it. So now I'm just cutting that 1/4 inch around all the way around the inside of that piece. I'm going to go ahead and do that for my other circles as well. You don't need to see that because you legit are just cutting out circles at this point. So make sure you do that for all your circles and then come on back. So the original fabric I used for this quilt is no longer available, so I'm remaking it in some solids here. And so for my case, I do not have a wrong side, but if you did have a right and wrong side to your fabric, you would want to make sure that you fuse it to the wrong side of the fabric, because the glue is going to remain on there, and then that's what's going to stick down to your background fabric. So you want to always make sure that the glue is on the wrong side, and then the pretty side will be facing out when we're all ready to go. And what you want to make sure you do before you do anything else is make sure that your fabric is pressed super flat, because if it is wrinkled or anything and you put this fusible on it, that wrinkle is going to stay there forever. So make sure it's super flat and that you work with that ahead of time before you do anything else. Now I'm just going to start at one end. I'm going to kind of work my way around the circle here with the iron. It doesn't take too much heat, but I do use the cotton setting for that. And my goal here is just to make sure that that circle is very flat when it is all said and done. All right, so I'm going to let this cool. You want to make sure it's cooled completely before you cut anything out. And in the meantime, I'm going to grab something else that I have pre-fused so I can show you how to cut everything out. So now what I want to do is I want to cut exactly on that line that's printed out. So I'm going to be removing this exterior layer of the fusible, and that's okay. We want to leave it on until it's totally fused down, because then that glue is going to go all the way to the edges of the fabric, which is great when we go to set it down. And one thing to keep in mind as you're doing this is you want to try to be as smooth as possible when you are trimming. So I use my really sharp micro-tip scissors to do this step. But if it's not super perfect, like if there are some spots where it just doesn't look like as smooth of a curve as you want it to be, we're going to surround this all with decorative stitching, and that will help smooth out any imperfections. So don't freak out too much if you go inside the line a little bit. It's going to be okay. All right, so go ahead and do that until you have all the circles cut out that you need. And then we're going to come back and we're going to start actually putting this on to our quilt. I do leave this fusible paper on until I'm ready to actually place everything, because otherwise it's too easy to accidentally iron over it and stick it to something that you don't need to stick it to. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like when it's all done cutting, this is a section I cut out earlier, and you can see it's just like fabric Swiss cheese. So we do have some waste in this, but the end product is really cool, so I'm not bothered by that at all, and neither should you. So for this next part, I recommend that you sew your borders on your panel before you get started. That way you don't accidentally put your circles too close to that 1/4 inch seam and regret it later. If you need help sewing a 1/4 inch seam, we have a video showing you 3 ways to sew an accurate 1/4 inch seam. That's part of our beginner quilting series. We'll link that in the video description down below, as well as up above, and you can check that out. So I'm just going to do the top panel here. You're going to want to sew all 3 of your panels together to have one big long one before you get started as well. But what I'm doing, I still have my paper on the back of all of these, is I'm just going to lay everything out first to get sort of my layout figured out here. Let's see, I need a little bit smaller one there. And so you're just going to want to keep referring to your pattern here. And if you don't get everything exactly where I did on mine, that's not the end of the world. It's perfectly fine to sort of take your own spin on this. That what you want to do is sort of make sure that you've got nice spacing and that it looks nice to your eye. So I'm going to put one of these there, and then I think we're good with this spacing here. So what I'm going to do here, and so if you've got like a really long table you can lay all this out on, that's ideal, is I'm just going to take and put a little bit of pin down the center of these just to hold them in place while I go get this over to my ironing surface, because once I get it all laid out, I don't want to then have to move everything again. I want to make sure everything stays nice and put where I thought it looked great before. Again, just like before, you want to make sure your panel is good and flat, because once we fuse this on, that it's staying where it's at. So it's not going to be moving after that. So make sure you are nice and wrinkle free before you start fusing everything in place. So I'm just going to slide my pressing mat on underneath this. You could also do this at your ironing board, whatever works best for you. So now, working one circle at a time, I'm going to go ahead and unpin that, and I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to take just my finger underneath there and peel off that paper. You're going to be left with what looks like a really shiny edge, and that's probably going to show up a lot better in person than on camera, but you should have about a 1/4 inch of glue that goes all the way to the edge. And then you just want to lay it back out and make sure you like the positioning of that. And then I can hit it with the iron, and I don't have to worry if I accidentally hit some of these other pieces with the iron, because we have that fusible or paper still on it. So that way it's not going to fuse yet. It'll just kind of hang out there until we remove that. All right, so I'm going to start in the center here. I'm just going to kind of slide my iron up and over. And just do a real quick pass first to make sure everything is nice and flat and laid down. Then I'm going to pay a little bit closer attention to the edges and sort of make my way around that circle, making sure that that glue is nice and fused. Now we're going to go over all this with the decorative stitch, so it's not like this has to permanently adhere to your quilt, but you want to make sure that it is good to go before you get to that point so it doesn't shift or come up on you, especially if it takes a little bit between when you do this step and when you do your decorative stitching. All right, so I'm just going to keep repeating that, working my way around. Just pull that paper off, put it back in place. This one's a lot smaller, so it's going to go a little faster. I'm just going to keep on going, getting all these guys fused down in place. So I finished fusing everything. Now it's time to take everything over to the sewing machine. And for this step, it is super helpful to have a applique pressing foot. And the idea is that you're going to be able to see as that needle is going to make sure that you are stitching just to the side of this and then in. I prefer a nice buttonhole stitch because I can stitch with the outside of the stitch going around the outside of whatever my applique piece is to kind of finish off that raw edge, and then it also secures over about 1/4 inch. So you're going to want to get threads that match as closely as you can to your pieces that you're working with, and now we're going to start stitching around. All right, so I've selected my favorite buttonhole stitch in here, and then I've loaded up my top thread with thread that is going to match this piece here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch so that the outside of the buttonhole stitch is just to the outside of this fusible web, and then it's going to pop in for those center bits. And the key point with this is just to go slow. You know, it's not a race. You just want to be able to do a good job and outline the stitch. It's also helpful to put the same thread in your bobbin as well. I did not, I'm going to confess, I totally did not do that for this because it's just going to be a sample for the video when all's said and done. But it helps just in case any of those bobbin threads get pulled to the top, then it will all look the same and it will all look good. And just do real gentle curves. If you need to stop, always stop with your needle down on the outside. It's a little easier to work that way. All right, so you're just going to keep doing this, working steadily all the way around until you make it all the way around your piece. And then just tie off your threads and move on to the next one. What I like to do is do all of one color at a time. That way I'm not constantly switching threads. And then do all of the next color until I'm totally done. That's it. That's all there is to Fusible Applique. It is really pretty simple when you break it down and it goes super fast. Now, as promised, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I quilted this. What I did was ghost quilting. So ghost quilting is where you essentially create an entire design in the negative space of your quilt. So in this case, I replicated my quilt panel in the side. So when you look at it from the back, it looks like there's two panels, but there really is just the one. And then the design that's in the panel is also quilted in the other side. So what I did is I laid everything out on a big table once I had my entire top assembled. And then I retraced out the lines for all of my circles in the background of my piece, so that way it was nice and symmetrical. And then I just quilted all the way around all my circles, and then I quilted in circles going out from there, and then I repeated that as if I had another applique panel when I got to the background part. And the results were really, really cool, and I love it, and it just looks fabulous. So thanks again for following along with this week's video tutorial. Again, this one is called Bubbles, and the pattern and all the cutting instructions is available in my book, Simple Quilts for the Modern Home. You can get that over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. And we're going to have a limited supply of kits of these as well, so you can check that out. And until next week, happy quilting.